All right, guys. Next topic. Metal Gear Solid 5 finally got a release date. September 1st, 2015. Now we've heard about
We're
this
not
game.
supposed to know that, are we?
But we do. But we
Thanks, NeoGAF.
Yeah.
And IGN's Spanish site or whatever the hell.
Yeah, I don't know what the hell.
Things happen.
Yeah, it happens.
It's bad. So, anyway, September 1st. That's a really interesting release date, in my opinion, because it's earlier than the holiday rush.
Sure.
And it's not the week of E3, which for some reason games like to do every
I
once in a
hate
while
that
when it's
crap.
big games.
Or
The
March.
Last of Us.
So I want to talk to you guys about release dates, their importance. How important is a worldwide day and date release date? How important is the season that you're releasing your game? Is there a strategy to releasing different games at different times? What do you think?
I
How
spent
important's worldwide?
so important, guys. No, I spent all of my childhood and teenage years being irritated by arbitrary 3-month waits for video games in Europe. And the reasons for that were like localization and stuff for all the European nations. And, you know, especially Nintendo, it would be freaking years sometimes before. And then sometimes we would just never get the game. And it would be out in America and it would be out in Japan. We'd just never get it here. Now, it's very different because sometimes we now get games earlier in Europe than everywhere else. And I don't know why this has happened. But things like, especially Nintendo, again, weirdly, they now release stuff here, you know, 2 or 3 weeks before the States. And I think that it's stupid now to not have a worldwide release date. We have digital distribution.
Right.
There is no valid reason for not having a worldwide release date. If you haven't translated it into all the right languages, then you've fucked up. You've badly managed your production at some point.
Like, especially when they're talking about digital and just the world we live in today, right?
Yeah.
Like Twitter, like trending on Twitter isn't limited
Yeah,
to one.
I mean,
you can break it down that way, but usually you want to have an impact and be
Yeah.
everywhere, be huge.
And, you know, Dying Light was a recent strange thing where
Yeah.
basically they only had a physical release in America, but in Europe we didn't have physical disc, but we had the digital version. So it was technically released and it did really well in the charts. And then they had a physical version released last Friday, so like a month on. And again, I think that was just probably the production of the discs went wrong or something. But again, that doesn't happen now. You don't need to produce discs most of the time. And you have this really stupid thing that happens sometimes where things come out in America on Tuesdays, right? In Europe, usually Fridays. So there's usually like a 2 or 3 day gap in the retail. But then sometimes on Steam it'll be like, oh, the new, I don't know, Civilization is out, but you have to wait 3 days, even though it's right there.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
downloaded.
that's dumb.
It's really
I've
That was
never
also-
understood that.
That was the problem that we were having here in the States for a while, where things came out, you know, time zones, right? Like everybody in New York gets it at 9, but then they'd, well,
that's
we're
so
gonna release it
stupid.
at 3 a.m. if you want the digital version. And you're like, what the hell are you doing for New York time? And New York people would get all mad about it, and they'd be all with this, with and the other, with watch and the other.
Oh,
with
yeah.
Watch and Whiffalo.
But now they're getting better about that too. PlayStation switched off that, it looks like, finally.
Yeah, I think that. Well, first of all, per Metal Gear Solid 5, I think it's an ingenious time to release the game. I don't think they realize that Mad Max is also coming out that same day, so that's gonna be
I don't think they give a fuck.
that's gonna be interesting. Well, Mad Max is gonna be huge. So
It's not
it's not
gonna
gonna
be
be it's not gonna be as big Metal Gear. But that's a AAA game. I mean, I'm just saying that I think that they probably thought the schedule was gonna be more clear than it is.
Do you think Mad Max is going to be a AAA game?
It's an Avalanche game. Yeah,
I mean, I'm just saying this is just going off Mad Max, where it's like, to me, that's just
Isn't
like,
that like
oh,
just a
sounds-
30-year-old movie?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think they're redoing it, but I'm just basing it on the studio that's making Avalanche makes AAA games. So I don't think that they're making and it's been in development for a long time. So I'm just saying, like, right off the bat, I think it's a great time to release the game. I think that they thought it was going to be more clear than that Mad Max is going to sell. But release dates are essential, and finding the releases. We were talking this morning with Nathan from Cappy about the dice roll of identifying a date. You really don't know when games are going to come out and who's going to be affected and what game you might have to go up against. And it's like a horrifying, it is actually, like, I think for a lot of developers, one of the most, and publishers, one of the most horrifying things.
Sure.
And you always feel so sorry when any developer has a release date and then some other big game is coming out that week and suddenly everyone's like, we can't review it, sorry, we're all really busy on this, and then everyone
Yeah.
doesn't buy it. And
Yeah,
it's just-
exactly.
it can really mess you up, right?
Which goes back to what Greg was saying about just the review itself being pertinent to, you know, even if it's a bad review, of
Some
making
press.
some press for your game. Yeah, because I mean, think about how people dodge Call of Duty and think about how people dodged Grand Theft Auto 5 like it was the
Yeah,
fucking plague.
man.
You know what I mean? So like, there's just certain bombs you drop. I don't think Metal Gear Solid is one of those bombs, but it's a good time for it. And I think what we were discussing earlier is that the paradigm of when games are coming out, when we expect the big and good games are coming out, is shifting. I think that the holiday season is good and good games come out then, but that's when we expected a lot of our games, like the mass of those games come out. And I actually think now we're seeing games, some of them being released in summer. I think Metal Gear Solid is a cusp on a summer game, which is really kind of interesting. And then you're seeing a lot of stuff in the spring, as we're seeing right now, games that weren't ready for fall that are being pushed. I think that's spreading it out. I think the conventional wisdom that holiday drives sales is absolutely true, but I also think the conventional wisdom is overstated. That if you find the right place to release your game, that means more than anything. Dying Light is the perfect example.
That would have done nothing in November.
Yeah, that's exactly what I wrote. I wrote about it because I still freelance for IGN, and I write a piece once a week over there. And I wrote about Dying Light. I'm like, Dying Light did 1.2 million copies in its first week. Dying Light in its lifetime, if it came out in November, would have done 1 million copies probably. Yeah. So it's like that, because Dying Light was it, everyone paid attention to it and found out, oh, it's actually a really good game. Like, I had no expectations for that game at all, and I wouldn't have had time to play it in November. Yep. But I'm glad it came out when it did, because it's my favorite game of the year so far. Not that there's too much out there competing with it. So I think those things matter. I do think that, per Kez's point, there's some complicated marketing and publishing things that keep games from coming out worldwide around the same time. And you see it a lot with smaller Japanese developers, especially in publishers. Like NIS and Atlas are often publishing each other's games in Europe and North America, because there's just weird shit going on that I don't quite understand between all the territories.
Contractual bizarreness.
But it's not nearly as bad as the days you were talking about. I mean, growing up as a JRPG fan in the early 90s and mid 90s, and obviously even in the late 80s, it was common to wait 18 to 24 months to get a game from Japan, and you didn't know what you were going to get. I remember like Treasure Hunter G or whatever, like Bahamut Lagoon, all these like games that came out on Super Famicom that were like, oh, we will eventually get these games, but they never came out. Because you were just because there seemed to be no rhyme or reason as to why some of these games would come out and some of them wouldn't.
I went totally nuts when I lived in Japan in 2008-9, and when I moved there, I had all these memories from, being a kid. I used to read this magazine called N64 magazine. It was my favorite. And there was this guy called Will Overton who used to do all the import reviews, right? And I'd be flicking through this and it'd be like, Oh Sumo 64, Mahjong Simulator, weird RPG that will never happen. I just remember like obsessing over these games. Like in my head, they must be the best games.
Because I can't play
Because I could never have them.
Absolutely good.
And then when I moved to Japan, what I didn't realize is that over there, game retail goes back. Like you go into a game store and they've got ancient games. They've got stuff from the late 80s there. Like they've just got, they'll have the wall of PlayStation 4, and then like upstairs they'll have buckets and buckets of N64 games and SNES games and NES games like way back, and every format that's ever existed, PlayStation games, and most of them, there'll be some rare ones in like a box with like a special, like it's $100 or whatever. Yeah. And then there'll be just buckets of other ones. Yeah. And there was this place.
How much money did you blow?
So much. But the thing was, all these N64 games, like Oh Sumo 64, which apparently was an amazing multiplayer game, Super Bass Fishing, and all these just weird games that never came out. Derby Horse Racer. All these things I bought because they were like 100 yen each, which is like $1. And I ended up buying like 50 Japan-only N64 games, and then I bought an actual N64 to play them, and every single time I get home to my dorm room, plug it in and be like, and it would always be terrible. Every time it would be, or like not great anyway.
Well, I think, Colin, when you're talking about the RPGs, I think that makes a little more sense just because there's so much text and there's so much like things that need to be translated. And
yeah, there was a localization, but there was also weird things. One of the famous stories of the NES era with Squaresoft specifically was that Final Fantasy II, the real Final Fantasy II, not Final Fantasy IV, which is Final Fantasy II in the States back in the day, was translated and done. And in fact, at CES that year, they had like pamphlets and playable versions of the English version of Final Fantasy II, which then just never came out.
Couldn't happen.
So there was all sorts of just weird shit going on back then.
Why? Do you know why that happened?
No, I mean, it must have been a publishing. Like, I think that Squaresoft at that time was like, no one's going to buy an NES game. Because Super Nintendo had come out in late 91, and so they were looking at it then. But there was localization and translation issues too, but also I think them just kind of seeing the market grow.
You had to think really seriously about releasing a game physically back then. It would cost you a fortune to release a cart game, and there was no. It is now like all these old Nintendo games that we never had. Like Earthbound never came out in Europe, I don't think. Anyway, games like that, they just stick them on the eShop now or whatever. And back then though, if you thought your game wasn't going to sell loads, you really couldn't manufacture all the cartridges. I mean, it would have bankrupted them probably.
Yeah, because I mean and that's a great point, because there was a lot of big problems. First of all, Nintendo stymied the entire cartridge industry intentionally. So you had to buy your cartridges directly from Nintendo unless you were like Tenjin and you wanted to like fuck around with them. And so you would get an allotment of cartridges, which you then had to pay ahead of time. And some publishers were bullish enough to, as we've talked about it many times, make basically shadow publishers. So like Konami and Ultra were the same company, but they were, because you could only release 5 games a year on an NES, they would make 2 companies to release 10 games. But there were other publishers that were much more cautious. And actually, when I did the history of Naughty Dog at IGN, I was talking to the founders of Naughty Dog, and they would tell the story about when they made their first Genesis game, which is Rings of Power. Which is an RPG, that they only could make like 100,000 copies of their game because there were no more cartridges to buy. And when the next allotment of cartridges came out, EA published the game and they're like, we only have X amount of cartridges and we're giving them to the sports guys, so we cannot make any more copies.
That's crazy.
And that's
different
like
world.
Yeah, it's like it's a totally different space. So things were just done differently then. But I think a lot of it maybe not necessarily had to do with just the market economics, but also translating a game is hard. A lot of the translations we got were terrible. I mean, and you only see that when you see a retranslation of Final Fantasy VI or Final Fantasy Tactics or games like that. And then the process of getting them localized and then going through cert again and all that kind of stuff, is it worth the money? Is it worth the time? I think that JRPGs had such a long tail in the United States that there with Final Fantasy II, for instance, I don't think the proof was in the pudding yet. I think when you saw a game like Chrono Trigger, right before PS1 came out, I think that was the proof, which is why during the PS1 era we were getting like 2 good RPGs a year for 5 years. So I think that times had just changed at that point.
But you couldn't just throw something out there and see if it sold, which you can do now. You can put something on Steam and just be like, see if anyone wants it. It's so much better. We get so many more games now. It really is so much better. Like the internet has completely revolutionized how games are played and how we can just have access to them. But on the other hand, like I had a friend who was extremely good at knowing about obscure as shit PS2 games, and he introduced me to a bunch of just completely weird things that were Japan only, and his entire world basically was learning about these games, and that's kind of gone now. His specialty is now gone. But things like Tulip, which I think actually came out in America weirdly, but it was a kind of isometric RPG where you're a little guy in a village and you want to kiss a girl that you like, so you have to work your way up to her by kissing all the other people in the whole village, starting off with the gimp who lives in the sewers. And you basically
good place to start.
It's the weirdest game. Oh, it was great.
I think that did come out
back then during the PS2 era, like the weird import thing was kind of like a marketing tactic. I remember what was the name? Ka the mosquito game. Yeah. We're like this mosquito that needs to go and like suck blood from people and stuff. I remember like for months reading about that in OPM, where it's just like, here's this game and it's gonna come to America and it's crazy, and it was like
that crazy Japanese games
and like so that was such an interesting tactic for them to use.
There was Rule of Rose, which was a really horrible horror game. There were loads of PS2 horror games that never made it out of Japan. I think Rule of Rose may have made it to Europe. I don't know if it came to America. Really scary. Had a dog in it, like you were adventuring with a dog, and I thought, cool, a game with a dog. I bought this in Japan, and it was just the most horrible thing I'd ever played. I think after about 10 minutes you're like locked into a coffin and children are urinating on you, and I was like, what is this? And then things like Gitaru Man, which did come out. And, but I had a lot of like weird Japanese games on my PS2 that I was kind of proud to know about. It was like a cred thing, and that just doesn't really happen now.
But now it's like there's such a the people who know about the cool independent game.
Oh, that's it. Yeah,
else knows
the
about
indie
it.
game.
Like I don't like. There's so much shit on Steam that I'll be talking to people and they'll tell me about a game. I'll do podcasts with fans and I'll be listening. I'm like, oh great, what is that? Cool, and I'll click over to buy it because it sounds so awesome. And it came out in 2012, and I'm like, Jesus, you know what I mean? There's too many games now, which is great. That's what we need. But
there was a talk yesterday at GDC. There was a chart that came up showing how many games were applied, were given to the App Store for certification every day, and it's like thousands every single day.
That's insane.
So how are you supposed to keep track of that? My partner used to work at Pocket Gamer, which obviously is an iOS and Android and Pocket Things site, and he was reviewing kind of 30 games a week in a roundup, and still barely, and that was years ago when there were like maybe 100 games a week, not 1,000.
When
and
now
now
it was
just
Levi Buchanan times, and you had a shot at knowing everything.
But right now it's like, I mean, there's no way anybody can know the mobile market.
Right.
They can't know and it's the same with Steam. Like there's hundreds a month on Steam, which is many fewer, but still too many to know.
Yeah, you can't play everyone have an experience with it.
Yeah, I feel like nowadays with like Let's Plays and Twitch and all that stuff, like those are the games. Like your friend that like talked about all the obscure Japanese games and all that stuff. Like now you look at the top Twitchers and they're just playing these. Or PewDiePie. PewDiePie's a perfect example. What the fuck games is he playing? Yeah, he plays Call of Duty, but then he also plays all these really weird.
He makes games. I mean, he makes games. Not literally makes them, but makes them in the sense that
a thing.
Tastemaker.
I mean, he made Flappy Bird take off, I think. You know, he did a video about that, and that sent it crazy.
But that's a perfect example. You know, like where the fuck did Flappy Bird come from?
Skate 3. He was playing Skate 3 last year. And they had to start reprinting the game in Europe.
Yeah, that's right. I forgot about that.
Really?
Yeah, I forgot about that
Because
story.
that was kids were wanting to buy it, and so they ended up reprinting Skate 3.
Damn.
See, that's fucking awesome.
Yeah.
All right, going back to the release date conversation for a second. So, looking at this big list Game Informer has of 2015 video game releases. So, January, there's a ton, and Dying Light was kind of the standout. February, we got The Order, IDARB,
Helldivers.
Evolve, Helldivers, all this stuff.
Well, Helldivers technically today.
There was a big.
I said February.
Oh, is it?
Good call.
Yeah, okay, cool.
I did not realize it was March.
So there you go. Now we're in March. Helldivers.
Thank you.
And
And La Mulana
there's a
EX.
million PS4 remasters because that's
Hotlight Man,
going to happen
Hotlight
forever. You know, and then you get into April, and so we start.
Hey, we had Monster.
seeing-
Nobody mentioned Monster Hunter. We had Monster Hunter.
Monster Hunter, we did.
And Majora's
Monster
Mask
Hunter,
on
we did.
3DS.
Reason we need
Yes.
to talk about Monster Hunter.
You know, then we
I
got
respect the Monster Hunter.
we got a lot of games coming. We're seeing the release dates and stuff, and then obviously since it's still a little early in the year, as you go on, there's very few dates that we actually
yeah,
have.
I
Today
guess
we
so,
got a date for Final Fantasy 10 and 10-2 on PS4. Then we got June 2nd, Arkham Knight.
Dun, 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 dun.
So that's like a big deal. August, we have nothing confirmed.
Isn't that E3 week? Why do people keep doing this?
Yeah, like why is that? Well, hold on. Let's
Oh.
continue this.
There's
got
gotta
to
be a reason.
Sorry, my bad.
Then the last one. Then we got September. We got Mad Max and Metal Gear Solid 5. Nothing confirmed after that. So Arkham Knight on June 2nd, the week of E3 or the.
Are we sure it's E3?
No, it's not.
No, it's E3 is in the middle of the month.
10th or
Oh, is
like
it?
10th
Okay.
to 15th.
Yeah, E3 is
They
late
did it with
this year.
Last of Us, and that's not like the. And there's other games they've done.
Didn't you
that
end
with
up
for
coming
sure.
to E3 late because you were having to do Last of Us?
I left. Yeah, well, that was what I was doing before The Last of Us, and then I left that night or that early morning to get more shit done for it.
Yeah.
Because I remember writing a story in the airport because remember The Last of Us was broken when it came out.
Yeah.
And I remember writing that up because everyone was freaking the fuck out. Like, you gave it a 10! And I'm like, it wasn't broken for me.
What game isn't broken when it comes out now? This
Yeah,
is
that's
like
a
what
bigger
game isn't
question.
broken? And this is we'll presumably talk about this a little bit later, but this is a major reason why almost everyone now just doesn't review games until they're out
Right.
because there's it's
Smart.
too much now.
But like that's interesting because there has been a couple other games. I can't think of them off the top of my head, but yeah, Last of Us, and there was other ones that I remember even being at IGN where we were like, shit, how are we going to cover this? We're all here doing this
Yeah, I
stuff.
remember Charles. What the hell was he reviewing during E3 once? Oh,
Bioshock? No.
no, it was it's a game like that. Shit.
Sounds like Bioshock.
No, I remember Charles brought a game. Oh no, I think it might have been Duke Nukem or something like that. I remember like when they finally released that shitty Duke
Yeah,
Nukem
yeah,
game.
yeah.
I remember him bringing his Xbox 360 to E3 to play. I think it was for that game.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, I mean there are
There are
games.
other examples that we can't remember.
Yeah, now going back to that though, so I think Arkham Knight is one of those games where it doesn't really fucking matter when it comes out. Like they can avoid the holiday season because it's going to sell and
Yeah.
like people are going to want that. Last of Us, it's pretty similar there, and even releasing during the E3 time kind of makes sense just because then it's like everyone's obviously going to be talking about it, so it's like here's the thing you could buy right now.
Yeah, you're
So
engaged.
that's cool. But then going to September 1st for Metal Gear Solid 5, I feel like that might be one of the earliest AAA holiday releases we've ever got. Like I remember
Yeah,
Halo.
usually it's late September onwards, isn't it?
Yeah, like Halo 3 was September 15th, I want to say, when it came out, and that was like, holy shit, like you guys are going real early. But I remember there was some reason for that. It might have been a Gears of War or something else that they were
Okay.
trying to like separate from, or that was when Call of Duty was really kind of starting to kick ass. But that's insane. Like, how much earlier do you think they can get than that?
I mean, it's not how much earlier. It depends on what you think of the industry right now. And does it matter to be that close to holiday season? You know what I mean? A lot of times when you're pushing and going to holidays and doing all these things, like you're trying to hit it so that your financials look right if you're that kind of company, right? And that's where these indie games step up, where it's like, fuck it, we'll release whatever we want whenever we want to
Yeah.
release it, and this is our time, and blah, blah, and it's
Doesn't have to
amazing.
fit
and it's
into
great.
Q2 for our profit projections.
Exactly. And so for Konami and Kojima, I'm sure they want to shine. And so like it's like we could go and be the traditional holiday launch and come on to end of November or whatever, but why would we go to the end of October, beginning of November when we can go to September and stand all alone for, hopefully, knock on wood, a month? You know, before there is another main contender to try to steal our limelight away. Especially if they believe in the game and it's going to come out and do, 9s and 10s and whatnot.
People only have so much money, ultimately.
Exactly.
But it's interesting, like when games come out that are just a little bit, when you think, oh, this could have done with an extra few months.
Yeah.
It's almost always because whichever publisher it is, 2K or whoever, has to hit their Q2
Yep.
financials projection, and so it can't be delayed from March 1st to March 9th. It just can't, Even the few days becomes a complete disaster.
Yeah, I think that. I mean, my reading the tea leaves totally on the outside, I know nothing about this, is like, this seems like the right time for Metal Gear. Let's not make any mistake. Konami, with the exception of Metal Gear and Pez, has nothing. So, like, they need this game to shine. You know, they need this game to do very well. Konami is, like, not the level of publisher that they used to be.
Certainly not.
But they have this game, and this game is going to be big because they killed Castlevania. So it's like now you have Metal Gear, and ironically, they killed Castlevania after doing a really nice job with the original Lords of Shadow. No idea what they were thinking with that sequel. No idea what they were thinking with that 3DS game. No idea what they're thinking not making Metroidvania games annualized. But this is the game that we've been waiting a long time for. When you think about Konami's IP and the studios that are working for them and the games that are coming out, I mean, this is it. So, like, it is a smart thing for them to avoid the fall. And the game might be done sooner than that, but maybe, you know, I think there might be something that's said about maybe not wanting to release your game in the summer.
Yeah, there was a lot of
People are
rumors about
outside.
that. People were expecting it. So
It's one of those things, people aren't at their computers. You know, video games, what we do here on Twitch, it's all a distraction from, you know, it's something to tune into, to be a part of. And so, yeah, if you're out living your life during the summer, you're a kid, you're not worried. If you're most kids, you're not worried. Like we were.
We were
still
like
home
we were all
pouring our magazines.
nerdy children.
Yeah.
I presume we're all nerdy adults.
Yeah.
So like we're sitting there in July like, why are there no games? But you know, the vast majority of people are just out like
On
climbing
vacation,
mountains,
doing this.
fishing, going to Spain.
Yeah.
God.
You know.
Going to Spain.
yeah, here you are. They're out fishing. You're getting these like import bass games
Yeah.
for the N64.
Exactly, yeah.
I'm fishing too. I was just saying, she was saying I'm fishing too.
Oh yes.
Yes.
I thought
Just
you were
by
talking about
myself
fishing. What are
in
your
my
thoughts on
room.
fishing, Colin?
I don't have any thoughts on fishing.
Yeah, I
no.
can't
No,
imagine.
I've never
Did
really
you
thought
ever
much
fish
about. No,
Really?
no. Again, another
fish
weird
so
thing
much.
because I'm from Long Island. And
You gotta get it when you get there. You gotta
We like
interview
to fish.
Matt Noel when you do the Greg Miller
You
documentary.
had
and talk about
sea,
fishing.
didn't
Huh?
you?
Get the sea.
Oh, no, I'm saying well, the ironic thing is I'm from an island and I
Yeah.
hate seafood.
Okay.
And that's like our big thing.
Oh, that's a shame.
You know, and-
Because like a lot of America genuinely doesn't have sea, so it would make sense that there'd be no fishing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, like, you know, fish in lakes and ponds, I guess. But nonetheless, yeah, I think I think this date makes sense for them. I think Mad Max is going to steal a little bit of their thunder. I think people that are into Mad Max are going to get that game. I have all the faith that Avalanche is making a good game with that. But yeah, this seems to make sense for like Konami needs the game to shine, and they need time to sell it, I think, too, because it's a game that I think people are going to get excited about. It is not a word-of-mouth game necessarily because people like Metal Gear and they're going to buy Metal Gear. But it might be a word-of-mouth game in the sense that some people have fallen off, and it has been a long time. Remember,
Might
it's
be a breakout Metal Gear as well.
I'm sorry?
Might be a breakout Metal Gear.
Yeah, exactly, because it's been 7 or 8 years since the last Metal Gear game, too, so people, I mean, the last core Metal Gear, not Peace Walker.
No, I know, but I'm just, I wasn't even offended. I just thought, and I was like, holy shit, yes.
Like,
it's
Metal Gear
4.
Solid 4 came out in 2008. So
Wow.
this is going to come out.
Peace Walking the Ground Zeroes and all this.
Yeah, so it's a shrewd move, I think.
I think it's gonna pay off, and they're gonna
Yeah.
go big.
It does look so ridiculously good.
I can't wait.
Yeah.
September 1st, man. Can't come soon enough.
I skipped MGS4. I played 1, 2, 3, and then skipped 4. And
Oh man, we can't even talk about this right now. We need to move on to the next topic. But my God,
I know.
I want to talk about
really
that
bad.
for a million. You
I've been
gotta
waiting
get
for.
on.
I've been waiting for like a weekend
Oh.
for 8 years.
It's worth it.
Gotta play
All
the
right.
Bassmasters on
Yeah, I
that.
know.
Shit, some important.